to oversee the Open Innovation Program at the Barclays Investment Bank, where I was the head of Rise New York. I think I mentioned that earlier this afternoon. And for those of you who are new to the event, that didn't change. I still did that. For the last year, I have been producing and hosting a number of shows for IBM Originals, and have just recently wrapped a pilot on innovation. It's a television show about innovation between big companies and small startups that I produced independently, and we just wrapped that the other night with the help of many of the Accelerator awesome staff. So extremely honored to be here, and the spiel I kind of give is I've gone from innovation executive to innovation storyteller over the last year, and part of that is based on a communication challenge that I found in my job at the investment bank, which was it was very hard to convince the most labyrinth and bureaucratic organizations you can imagine to not just love innovation, which many of them did, but to embrace it, to adopt it, and to integrate it into their ways of thinking. And so that's a lot of what we're going to hopefully cover today. Does everyone have a microphone? Is everyone feeling comfy with a mic? Great. So we're going to start, and then when Vanessa comes, we're going to continue, which is what you do after you start, apparently. So Greg, why don't you kick us off? Who are you? What do you do all day long?
I'm Greg Larkin. I am the founder of Bowery 315, and I just wrote and published my first book, which is a bestseller, and please buy it. It's called This Might Get Me Fired, and it's about how to thrive as an entrepreneur in a company that is not entrepreneurial.
Awesome. That's an awesome title.
I don't know how to follow that. Just be me. So I keep telling myself. I run. My name is Bharat, Krish. I run a company called Refine AI. We actually went through Techstars Accelerator last year, and also we have a partnership with SAP thanks to the program. So I sit here, not too far from it. So the company is about helping advertisers and media companies increase their viewership, and we use machine learning algorithms to come up with prediction. So in a previous life, I worked in the corporate sector for a long time. I was before the startup, I was the CIO for HBO Latin America, and then I worked in NBC Universal for a long time. So I did create innovation programs within corporations, and I feel like the way startup are and the accelerator mechanism today is much better suited for innovation than traditional innovation programs within corporate environment. And happy to talk to you all about it and what worked and what didn't.
Hi, I'm Christian Guirnalda. I'm a recovering corporate innovator.
That's what I should have said.
Yeah, it helps when there's happy hour after to kind of make all the politics go away. But for the most part, I've been at Verizon for almost 10 years now. Started in different product development functions. Was with Verizon Ventures probably for 5 years, where all the early stage investments, seed investment, accelerator partnerships, you name it, LP'd a couple of seed funds, venture studios, and then started an open innovation function probably 3 or 4 years ago. And innovation is just a terrible word. It means so many different things to so many different people. And part of it is to try and, as Verizon, put innovation and 5G together, which is the whole focus of the gig now, is how do we go and explain what the heck 5G is? Does anybody know? Exactly. One. And make people build on it today before it's even here. So for us, it's pointing towards the tangible outcome associated with building and working and creating something new versus saying it's innovation or it's prototyping or it's some other fancy name.
Bharat, I want to ask you this question first, given you've been in many different sides of the what we now popularly call ecosystem, what I used to just call startup stuff. How do you identify as a corporate the value of an accelerator That's the theme of the day. That's where the excitement of today is all about, because that is a way of casting the widest possible net for the most diverse number of startups, but you then have to understand programmatic challenges, curriculum-based challenges. So from both the position of being a corporate executive and a founder with the accelerator experience, what is the value that an accelerator could provide to a large corporate?
I'll give you an example. When I was the CIO, I handled a lot of vendors that came through the door. Most of them were fronted with very smart salespeople. Okay? And when I see startups, you can't really afford salespeople in the beginning. So I never saw a single startup come through my door that was a CEO pitching to me. It was also always a salesperson. So that means that they've gone through a growth stage, and even if they're a startup and they're an established company. So, but I had to go and find the startups, because I'll give you an example. If we were tackling Wi-Fi issues across Latin America, and I wanted to come up, bring on board a startup that can figure this out, right? And I found a company that really did that, and they later got acquired by Cisco. Meraki is the company, I don't know if you all know. They were a startup at that time, and I had to go find them, right? They never came through my door. So what accelerators can help is really pitching these startups to the corporates, right? So getting in front of a CIO, getting in front of a CTO, and be sort of the sales front in a way, you know. So create a platform that's even bigger than their startups, because when I look as a CIO, when I looked at a company, I said, are they going to be alive in 2 months? You know, are they going to support my infrastructure across a large global presence? But if say SAP is a partner to them, or if Techstars is pitching them, then there is a brand name associated with it that could even be false sense of security, but there is some security that you can rely on the startup from. So I think the accelerators have a huge responsibility in pitching their startups.
And it sounds like also for filtering not just what kinds of companies, but the stage of company.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. By the time a startup got to you, it was no longer small enough that the CEO was taking the meeting.
Right.
They were not the seed stage. Greg, in your case, assuming that you've only been fired a couple of times based on your book title, some of the decisions in and around accelerators must have worked out. What do you think the value there is?
I think the value is kind of twofold. So I was the head of innovation at Bloomberg for 4.5 years, and I also
I've heard of the company.
we'll call them global fintech for now. And I also did ran product.
Welcome, Vanessa. Hello.
Hello, Vanessa.
And we promised a round of applause. I want to make sure we got him.
It's nice to see you.
We haven't been busy or anything. Yeah.
No, I can tell. I just saw this couch. It was just
It
really.
was really comfy. You look like nice people. Yeah. Global fintech company that may or may not be famous. You were there 4.5 years.
Yes,
Got it.
and then I ran a product on a joint venture between Google and PwC. The value of an accelerator was twofold. One is it was a really, as an entrepreneur, I think one of the most critical things you have to do is always illustrate the cost of not innovating. It's very hard to gain leverage within the organization, within executives who are convinced that they know their market, are convinced that they're doing it right already, who are convinced that their way is the right way, and are extremely territorial about the fiefdom that they have built over the course of their career.
And may I just add, in that their value is attached to?
Their entire sense of
Because controlling a
professional-
fiefdom, it leads to bonuses, and it leads to bigger teams, and...
Right, and their sense of self-worth is deeply intertwined with that fiefdom. So there's an enormous amount of emotional, entanglement. We'll put it like that. So what I found was that working with good accelerators and working with startups this is the company that'll put you out of business if you don't partner with them and don't make this a safe space. And that, more than anything, provided mission critical leverage. And I'll say one other thing, which is that as an entrepreneur, it's mission critical that you never pitch an idea and that you only pitch an outcome. And it's very hard to do that within the confines of an organization where the way things work is you wait for the annual business planning meeting, you hope you build up a case for budget, you work with McKinsey and BCG, you present a PowerPoint deck, and you hope that people like it. And when you work with a startup, what you're showing is the actual launch of a product. You're showing that you've developed a mission-critical solution to a problem that your organization needs to solve. And you're not asking for them for permission. You're saying, here's an opportunity to participate in growth that your organization needs, and the growth won't go away if you say no. The startup's here, the innovation is here. The question is whether you participate in its growth or whether it happens outside of the four walls of your organization. And that doesn't happen without smart collaboration with fast-growing startups.
And a recognition of outcome versus sort of ambition, I guess. Also, this is going to produce tangible results. Christian, in your experience, have you partnered with, funded, worked with an accelerator? And if so, what value did that provide back to you and your business?
Yes, and yes. I think early days, a lot of it was so nascent that people were just like, let me throw a logo on the wall, right? It's a sponsorship team, a marketing side that wants to be associated with innovative startups, et cetera, et cetera. And I think over the last couple of years, the whole ecosystem has evolved to the point where, well, you've got dedicated sponsored programs that corporates go and do themselves. You've got corporates learning how to do it from the Techstars of the world and then ultimately turning that into a business for their agency to go and copy and paste to different clientele. You've got new forms of accelerators along with new forms of early investments, from convertible notes to safe notes to all different types of investment mechanisms. And then alongside that, all the big companies kind of putting stuff internally to go and do the same thing. So across that time horizon, we've done the logo on the wall, early days. And then from there, we've tried to figure out ways to make ultimately win-win-win-win scenarios, right? You talk about outcomes. When outcomes are multiple business units getting different buckets of value from a single investment, where you can almost argue that, why wouldn't you do this? Those become the opportunities for accelerators, both externally facing and internally facing, to really get adopted internally and get the buy-in from executives. So I'll give you an example. When we did the last accelerator around media tech, and we talked about the curriculum associated with each of the startups, right? So they get certain training and master classes and pitch days and mentorship. How's that? Better? Okay. We married that curriculum with internal talent development, right? So we weren't just asking for the startups to get smart, we paired that with HR so that they got employee benefit out of it as well. We weren't just saying, hey, we're going to get a new partner out of this. We also said we're going to give 2 or 3 specific APIs so that those teams understood the stress test that a startup would put on it. And so really getting 3-for-1s from a big company's perspective is a way to get kind of through some of those internal politics so that the $1 stretches into 3 different buckets of P&L. And ultimately, that's how you're able to go and do more in the space.
It's also designed, just to Greg's point and to Bharat's point, it's actually identifying something so early that you can try to stretch it into those 3 different buckets. You're saying like, hey, I actually know exactly, because all of this is salesmanship and to some extent, right? Proving to those above you and below you on the totem pole, like, hey, this innovation thing is not jargon. It's going to yield X, Y, and Z results, and I'll prove it by, Q4 how I do it. Watch.
And part of that is the people that are promoting it in the company need to have the context across all of those organizations. Right. Because if it's just, I'm going to do it for the product group or the network group or the marketing group and then sell it up and try and go across, there's no way that those incentives or sort of goals long-term are going to be aligned. So you've got to go and figure out, okay, a year out, 2 years out, what does marketing need to do? What does tech and technology need to do? What does the sales organization need to do? And if you can find the sort of shared ground to start pitching that internally and say you can get benefit here, benefit here, benefit in here, that's how you're going to be able to go and execute.
Vanessa, let's move on to the next question actually and start with you about intrapreneurship. Yet another sort of oft-bandied word that means a million different things to a million different folks. How do you define an entrepreneur? And if you enjoy entrepreneurship, how do you encourage it within the walls of SAP?
Yeah. So the way I define entrepreneurship is basically taking the vast resources there are in a large organization and being able to use that to start something anew. And so here at SAP, at least at sap.io, which is where we sit, we have two parts of our organization. We have an entrepreneurship organization called the Venture Studio, and then we have the Fund and Foundry, which is external facing. Yeah. And where we are bringing external startups, the whole idea is to bring their innovations into SAP. So, I regard at least like the team that we have, which is more on the external facing side, as the ones who are being able to bring the change that a lot of these external startups are able to bring to bear, and tying them to the right people within SAP who can help them grow their businesses. That is just as important as obviously taking ideas that are internal here at SAP and growing them to full-fledged new business lines.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Greg, I want to come back to that because the startup point is something that's very much on my mind, but in fairness to the panelists, I want to get your definition of entrepreneur and how it's supported. Because you mentioned objectives as an outcome for an entrepreneur, but who the hell is trying to create these objectives?
So my definition of an entrepreneur is on one hand, your job is to solve an unmet need in a differentiated way, and in that regard, I don't think they're different than an entrepreneur. But they have another job, which is they have to make their organization more afraid of extinction than they are of change. And that's much harder. And that dual mission of market validation and market acceleration, as well as exponential organizational change, so that there's a cluster of new leaders and skeptics that are converted into supporters and have the zeal of the newly converted as it pertains to innovation. There's no way you can thrive with a great product without also having cultural transformation as an explicit mandate as an entrepreneur. And I think that's that cultural piece and the extent to which that has to be part of what you do every day and every week, and has to be part of the product backlog. I find that is often something you realize you need to do when you get thwarted because you've built a great product and it's not going anywhere. And I guess I have an unstated prayer. It's stated now because I wrote a book about it, but that
stated and sold very well.
It's doing all right.
Did you get fired? Did you get fired?
No. I quit. And then I helped other people get fired.
Nice.
All of whom, by the way, have gone on to make more money with more fulfillment afterward than at any point in their life. So it's worse things could happen.
Bharat, entrepreneur. As an executive turned entrepreneur, what is that sort of sweet spot in between?
I don't know. I mean, I'll speak from my experience of being an entrepreneur. So I was hired into HBO, and I had no idea what I was getting into, which was organization that was completely blown up into many pieces. Marketing had its own technology, finance had its own technology. And then 2 days later, they said, you have to now launch HBO Go for 10 million subscribers.
No pressure.
Go, right? So there's no choice but to think like an entrepreneur, how do you build this streaming technology that's going to work in a village and in the city at the same time, and how do you price it for every single country? Some entrepreneurship in my mind is more of like a necessity for a lot of companies to innovate. And if they put the right person there, they can achieve that. And I had to go and hire people and train them and import people from different countries with expertise. So it's a different focus when it's within a company. It's more of a necessity, doesn't happen organically. It's like in my case, I had to build something that's, if not, the company is going to be behind Netflix, so there was a necessity, and we had to innovate. So, but it doesn't happen all the time.
Right. So entrepreneurship as a way of addressing a major need, which, like an entrepreneur, comes out of
Yeah.
problem needs a solving, and I'm the only one that is able to provide that solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's
With the
almost like-
toolkit and the
yeah.
resources and the scale, I mean, to be fair,
Yeah.
falling behind Netflix is a real risk to only that company that is already beating Netflix potentially,
Yeah.
right? Like you're starting from
Yeah.
a very scalable platform to begin with.
Right. I mean, also, I think the luxury of being an entrepreneur is you don't have to worry about the money in a lot of cases. You're not, like, company's not going to fall off the cliff. So at least you have money in the CFO's bank, that you can use. So you can be, in theory, you could be more creative.
But you're also
At the
still
time.
not taking meetings with the CEO at a big company. That's still not the...
Yeah.
For very different reasons.
Right,
Yeah, for different,
right.
still a different team.
Yeah.
So Christian, intrapreneurship, is that a culture that is fostered at Verizon for addressing the outcomes that you described earlier?
Well, I don't know. I'm jaded by it, right? Like it's to be an entrepreneur. It's just like you said. It's trying to do the right thing for the business, right? It's making the right decision and trying to convince people that this is the right way to achieve the business outcome that you need. People should do that anyway, right? If working with a startup is going to get us a better outcome, you should do that anyway, right? You look at environmentally friendly server stuff, right? It's good for the brand and for the environment. No, by the way, I reduce server costs and energy consumption, right? You should do that anyway.
Right. It reminds me of the Chris Rock. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to raise your kids. It's like that's to me that feels like right. Like these are not things that you should be necessarily congratulated for. If what you're
I'm a
focusing
good
on,
dad.
Yeah, exactly. If what you're focusing on is shareholder value, and if that's your job to begin with, these are the things you're already supposed to be focused on.
Totally, and part of it is I'm jaded by it because I know personally, early days, I killed 3 companies, right? You promise the world, you underdeliver, and you don't know the expectations to set. Yeah. And same thing on that side, right? First-time entrepreneurs at an incubator or an accelerator phase, not understanding how to go and engage the right way, and making sure that they're setting the same expectations because their company's only got so much burn left, right?
Yeah, that's a very important point, and a transition back to the startup question I have for you in a moment, but it brings up a personal memory for me in the middle of my second year at Barclays where we had made a promise that fell just before Christmas for one company, and the excuse to be able to pay this company the amount of money that it needed to make sure that it didn't run out of runway was basically held up over a Christmas schedule. And it was a Christmas schedule, and it was a vendor management problem, and it was someone didn't make the right phone call. And none of that affected my day-to-day, I'm sure, as it didn't yours. And I had 300 other commitments to make. And then you get that phone call from that founder, at 8 o'clock at night, tears, you hear the treble in his voice, and it's like, look, I promised my team that they would have a job in 3 months. And you've signed something that says you have a job in 3 months, and you've made all these commitments to your team as a founder. Can't you relate to that? Can't you understand that? And if you're in the Goliath seat talking to David, it gets sort of triply hard. You're hearing it from above in your own organization. You're hearing it from yourself, and you're also hearing it from the founder.
And they're going to learn from it too, right? Those 3 companies, they're just fine. Like I Facebook stalk them all the time, and I'm like, okay, he's at Palantir now, and she's at Google, and they're doing just fine. Yeah. But entrepreneurs, you can't be a first-year entrepreneur, right? Because you got to have a little bit of bruising, right, and scars to understand how to not do it. Like, there's so many ways that you can jump in and say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an innovator at a company. You don't have the context yet, right? You don't have the experience yet to know that there's lots of wrong ways to do it. And I think for companies like ours, I think there's folks that have been around a little bit long enough to understand how to set structures in place to have that probability reduce over time, and I think we're seeing a little bit more of that now than we have like 5 years ago.
Or roll their eyes and be like, oh, you're this year's entrepreneur? Cool. There were 50 of you last year. Yeah. So to your point about working with startups, and I hear 2 ways in. One is developing out, one is pulling in. There's the sort of push model and the pull model. What value is working with an early stage company right now outside of venture investing? We have obviously a number of startups in the room today, and a great many accelerator MDs that are spending all their time recruiting startups in hopes of bringing them corporate customers like you.
Yeah. So at SAP, we believe in cultivating an ecosystem of startups. Why? Because these are going to be the companies that are going to innovate and be the real shakers of tomorrow. The only way to learn how to work with them is not when they're bigger down the road, but to start working them today. And so what we're doing at the Foundry is actually really different. It's a no equity accelerator program. We don't make an investment. What we basically say is like, for 4 months, work with us. We're not requiring you to take any of our technologies and integrate them into your platforms. This is about figuring out how we can work together. And this is much more about a long-term play. Like, we look at this 4-month period as a way to basically be a catalyst for the relationship, so that down the road, you like us, we like you, we know how to work together, and so we know how that relationship can grow. If you think about SAP as a business, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but our channel partners are really like an integral part of our business. And we have so many channel partners that we work with. We want to do the same thing when it comes to the startup ecosystem. And so for our Foundry programs, we have now 4 Foundries around the world, a 5th to be launched in Paris. Our idea is that through each of the Foundries, we'll work with 2 cohorts of companies a year, 10 companies each cohort. That's 100 companies that we can touch on an annual basis globally, which, if you just compound that over several years, is going to make a meaningful impact in terms of how we work with early stage companies.
And one of these early stage companies is yours, Bharat.
That's right.
So what is the relationship right now between what you're doing and SAP?
I would say multifaceted. We use SAP's name when we talk to customers. So we're partnered with SAP, or SAP is investing in us, or
Have you heard of sorry, SAP? Yeah.
So it definitely gets us in the door. So and also interestingly, there are customers that we've been talking to, and then all of a sudden now we say, hey, we're working with SAP, and now they're interested in us. You know, it's so that's a big one. Of course, SAP is also helping us align customers. I sit here selfishly to take advantage of the customers that walk in here, and be able to show demos to them. And SAP's customers are anywhere from, travel industry to retail to brands, all kinds, 300,000 customers. Right?
But is that selfish, or is that using what large companies do so well, which is scale? Because
Yeah.
they're going to be doing that anyway. That's the role
Yeah.
and responsibility of SAP, is to provide customer satisfaction.
Right.
And by virtue of having built the ecosystem, you're plugging companies like that in to help both the company and the customer.
Yeah, I think it's a
Yeah.
win-win.
Yeah.
It's very much a win-win, because what we always say, like, we're talking to our clients, we don't want them to think that we're selling them their grandfather's ERP. Like, this is
Right.
about showing a new company that is very flexible, that knows how to innovate. The way that we do that is by showing who we work with. And so companies like Bharat's company, Refine.ai, they make us look good. And so that is great. And it's also very beneficial when we say, hey, here is a company that's really interested in learning more about you. And we've curated that for our customers. And so they really appreciate that as well.
But if you want to buy your grandfather's ERP, you can. That's
Yes,
something that
you
you guys
can.
also, is also part of what happens to the SAP.
We know a few people.
Yeah, sorry, you were going to...
Yeah, and so for Verizon, right? It's a two-way equation, right? And some of it's tangible, some of it's funding, some of it's NRE, just revenue on the books, some of it's joint client stuff. In a 5G world, right? We fundamentally think that it will change the way you build applications and hardware over the next 3 or 4 years. And for us, we kind of have a sneak peek at what that's going to look like and how it's going to change edge computing and the amount of data you can go and put through networks in new ways. But we don't actually know how to use it, right? We're not a hospital network. We're not a Tesla gigafactory. We're not a Boeing or a university. But the startups that are trying to go and build new things to disrupt each of those industries, they live and breathe it every day. And we think if you mash those two things up, you're going to have a better outcome, because you're giving people that are experts, that are living and breathing and working and eating ramen noodles every night because they just want to go and solve for that one thing, for that one industry, the tools that are going to give them the advantage over time. That's where we really think there's value. And oh, by the way, we learn a heck of a lot from it. So as we go and invest billions of dollars to go and put 5G into cities across the whole country, we know what kind of services in which of these industries are going to be the most important over what time horizon. So is it an efficiency play? Is it immersive customer acquisition play for each of these verticals? And we're engaging now and building things now so that we and those startups both see the future together, and we can show the world that we're also in that together.
Well, I was going to actually throw it to you, but you can go address that first if you want.
Yeah, so I think there's an explicit mandate at Verizon and at SAP to be ahead of the curve of modernity.
Yeah.
You're in the business of technology. I think where you're from and where I'm from, which is finance and doing work at a place like PwC, and I just launched a huge new product with Nestle. No one expects them. Those are very mature industries with very mature business models, and it's not. My perspective is that they are at risk of disruption if they don't continue to innovate and empower the entrepreneurs in their midst.
And no incentive structure. Like Nestle is actually a perfect, more than financial services, because everyone actually knows what Nestle does, whereas some of these other industries are fairly opaque. But you understand that the best way to, keep your job and then be promoted to a better job potentially within the company is to probably be more risk averse than the next person.
I just met today with the.
I feel like I'm triggering you. I'm sorry. It was like an hour ago. I watched your face. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, so I just met someone who's. I'm not going to say the airline, but the chief innovation officer of an airline that we've all flown on, and he's like, it's extremely difficult. He was also a pilot. It's extremely difficult to foster an entrepreneurial mindset in an organization where the definition of success is going through a 499-point checklist in exactly the right order and exactly the right way. And that's how you thrive. The person who does that the most is considered to be the best at their job. And being disruptive in that environment where there's an explicit the definition of success is that you've memorized the rule book and executed it without having to check.
But there's a kind of person, and I want to throw to Vanessa on this after, starting with the two of you, then going to Bharat and Christian. There's a kind of person that thrives in that environment, and I think it's almost unfairly typed as political, or they maneuver. That's not really what it is. There's a kind of person that also intrapreneurially enjoys helping to build or be the platform for an ecosystem to grow. That's right. They're not eating ramen noodles every night because there's not that one problem they want to fix. They want to fix a whole suite of problems. So for those folks, is it really, and I'm not being glib, but is it really wise for them to want to go get fired? Or is it wise for them to keep sort of hacking away in the forests of their company?
So I think in every organization there's a godfather or a godmother who wants to use their power and use their authority and use their understanding of the architecture of the place. For that matter, they may have built the architecture of the place. And they want it to be their legacy to build an innovation inflection point within their organization. And there is no company that doesn't have it, even in those very mature industries. But making them visible and building the connective tissue so that everyone who needs them can find them and forge a partnership with them, and on some ways kind of make that the new normal of how the company operates. That has to be a proactive thing rather than this sort of underground secret whispering campaign, which it very often is.
Right. And Vanessa, to that end, you're identifying founders, and thinking certainly entrepreneurially, but I think that folks like you have to become pillars of the company, or else SAP's not actually doing any sort of next gen thinking.
Right. I mean, so much of what we're trying to do is obviously strategic to SAP, and it was very interesting. This first cohort, we launched it in April. I only joined SAP at the end of January, and so you can imagine in terms of the selection process, having to choose companies, but not knowing, basically on a very detailed level, what we were looking for at SAP meant that I had to really just lean on a lot of my colleagues for that. And I mean, I think that, to your point, what I would add is that there needs to be, basically, many people who are really pushing the innovation agenda. It's not just about having one person. It's about having a whole mindset of how important this is. Yeah. What we're hoping to do is that this is a catalyst for the whole entire organization to think in a very different way, to say, hey, whenever we do meet interesting companies, there's a very structured way of having them work together with us. And so that's really what we're trying to drive towards.
And the structure is such that you make that sort of plain as early as your first conversations with those entrepreneurs?
Right. As plainly as possible. We could still do a much better job, but that's what we're trying to say. Is like, if you are a startup, this is the engagement platform. We can help you basically have those initial discussions with SAP, which might take you several tries over a course of 18 months and shrink that down to 4 months.
Christian, you had a...
I kind of love the Godfather comment because it's probably less about being the Godfather or Godmother. It's about being the consigliere, right? Because what happens to the Godfather? We all know what happened to the Godfather, and in big companies, there's always regime change, and so there's two pieces. One, can you be the person behind the person that can go and outlast regime change? Number one. And number two, can you understand those dynamics well enough to also know when to say no to a startup that looks good, is great, but the timing might not be right internally? And so if you're a startup and you're thinking, hey, I've just met somebody and they're giving me this big opportunity, ask them how many times they've said no to other things. Or maybe say like, hey, that first time you say no, but stick around, we're going to keep in touch. I'm in this for the long haul, and we're going to find the right time to do this the right way.
And not to get too deep into The Godfather, but the thing that I had to keep talking about, like, wasn't that such a great movie? No, but what I was thinking about was, like, it's not personal, it's business, is unfortunately the sort of post-it you almost want to slap on your forehead with, vis-a-vis startup relationships. Like, we love you, we might want to work with you, but this isn't the right time, is a common enough philosophy that is not always understood by founders, just to be fair.
But if it's an offer you can't refuse, think twice.
There it is. What? Hey, if I don't wrap this up soon, I'll be sleeping with the fishes. No, but Bharat, on that note, again, you're now in the driver's seat of your own business. Given your corporate experience, does that make you more receptive to kind of the tricks that are played in the offices of companies that aren't SAP? When you're looking for additional customers, how much of your own background do you bring with you to the pitch?
Oh yeah, I mean, tremendous. Because I'll give you an example. I mean, when I was the CIO, I made decisions not necessarily because, I thought the technology was great or not. It was multiple things, including I had $10 million to spend in the last quarter. If I don't spend it, the CFO is going to take it away from me next year. So, and I have to buy tech for next year. So these are the stupid things we did, So, and it still exists. So, I mean, it's kind of frivolous thinking about it right now. And the decisions that were made because a competitor is using that technology, and we can't use that technology. So where accelerators and of course corporates can help is bring that mindset for startups, where decisions are not just purely based on how much cost they can save or how much operational efficiency they can get. There are other things involved. Timing is one. Knowing the person's background, there are all of those things that exist when you talk to a corporate CEO or CIO.
The other thing on the accelerator front is leverage the accelerator's network to understand people who have engaged with that corporate before, right? So if you're going through accelerator X, Y, and Z, go to the alumni company from 3 years ago who was also pitching to company X, Y, and Z and say, how did that work out? How did you get the outcome that you got, good, bad, or indifferent, so that you can really take advantage of the network effect of the accelerator that you're in?
That's a good transition to my last question. Then we'll have time to open it up to about 3 from the audience if we do okay. Starting with Christian, going back, you have a long history of working with accelerators, first on the venture side and then in open innovation. What do you look for in an accelerator? We've learned so much today about venture-backed models, about university-backed models, about educationally focused nonprofit models. Does any of that factor into how you decide with whom you want to work?
I mean, incubator and accelerator in and of itself are misnomers. You can't, it's like innovation at this point. And so the way to think about what we're doing is it's a portfolio-driven approach. And just like a venture portfolio, we're not going to place all of our bets into one basket. And for particular purposes, we're going to go and work different methods to get to the specific outcomes that we need to get to. So I'll give you an example. For specific things in universities where we like, one, engaging early talent so we can hire them, two, the great ideas in R&D that they're doing, and three, just the good network effects that it is that comes out of it to help the community here in New York. We work with the NYC Media Lab, and they work with us to go and give and identify really great student entrepreneurs and researchers that we want to go and enable. And for that level of engagement, that's who we like to work with. In sort of a startup phase of things, there's other companies that we want to partner with to go and execute specific programs that are relevant to a particular stage of startup. And then for big enterprises, there's a whole other function that we go and have, ways that you go and take lab A and lab B in two big companies and figure out a model and a process and a framework to go and have those all work together. Now, you take those three factors, you take each specific industry that we're interested in building 5G technology on, there's a whole big chessboard of things that we're doing, and each of them have different levers that we like to pull because, like New York City versus Boston versus DC, industries and ways that you go and attack different growth models in those spaces all differ, so it can't ever be one size fits all.
Bharat, I'll just make a quick tweak to the question before I ask the same of Greg and Vanessa. The challenge that you're now having as an entrepreneur means that you're evaluating accelerators differently from another perspective. So where do you place most value in the accelerator experience?
So having gone through one, I would say the biggest value is this happens when recruiting startups, where you look for the right team when you recruit them and you put a lot of emphasis on it. But during the course of the acceleration, the team priority goes away, right? So what I'm talking about is then it becomes about product, do experiments, do marketing, do sales. But what happens during that time is there's a lot of stress built and the team dynamics change, okay? And which leads to a lot of breakups that I've seen in startups. So what I would say is emphasizing on the team throughout the process. If you can help the team dynamics flourish, everything else will follow, I believe. So that would be one thing I would say, plug on what my experience has been.
Thank you. The value of an accelerator that you first identify in any one of the hats that you're wearing, author, entrepreneur.
So I think what I'm looking for in an accelerator is, well, let me give you the worst case scenario is what I would call the innovation quarantine. And if there's not an on-ramp to bring some of the technology and some of the team, to Bharat's point, kind of into the mothership of the core revenue stream of the company, and that might not be something that happens over the lifetime of the accelerator, session, but can you see this team growing to become a core business unit, and are we proactively encouraging that synergy in a way where that can actually be absorbed and digested by the organization? If that's not thought about really early, then what you very often, I think, have happen is you have this sort of lab of incredible things that's totally untethered to the way the core business operates. So I think that kind of digestibility at the stage of growth is a really important thing to look for.
I also like the phraseology of that so much, digestibility at stage of growth. Thank you. Vanessa?
So there are a few things. I think when it comes to working with an accelerator, it's very similar to picking an investor. There has to be good chemistry. These are going to be people who you trust, and I would hope that you're cultivating a relationship with, like a really deep relationship with, where for a certain period of time, you can actually share those issues that you're really grappling with. And so with trust also comes with just having the ability to empathize. And so having been a founder before is so important, because then you know what the other person is going through. So I think even just down to that level, because at the end of the day, it's about working with people that you like. It's about working with people who you really just want to be deep in the trenches with. This is like a partnership. And so in addition to like all of the, great things like mentorship or like, specific credits that you can get in X, Y, and Z, this is about chemistry.
Thank you to all of our awesome panelists. We have time for 2 questions. Okay, yes, sir, go for it. And if you don't have a microphone, feel free to come up and borrow one. Also announce who you are and what you're doing here.
Okay. My name is Jose Garcia. I run the New York program of the largest pre-seed stage accelerator in the world, Angel Hack. And my question is, I come from an HR background, and one of the biggest challenges is when you're in a big company, you don't know what's happening, and a lot of innovations are often in stealth mode, right? Unless you're on the right team or your boss is really influential or you happen to know a really well-connected person, you have no idea where the exciting projects that a company is working on. So I'm just curious, this question is directed to Christian and Vanessa predominantly, but I'd love to hear from anyone that else wants to chime in, is what are you doing to help the employees that might be wanting to work on these really cool projects to get involved? Because that's something that Techstars does really well, is they get all these executives that feel bored at their jobs or disengaged and say, wow, I get to work on some really cool projects and bring it into my company. And if you did that, honestly, like I think a lot more excitement, engagement, things would happen. And it would be great for some of the startups as well. It's great for the startups that want to be involved and get that expertise but don't have the budget.
Should I take it first? So here at SAP, it is such an integral part of our program that we have mentors who come from SAP internally. And so right now we have a roster for the New York program itself, about 60 people that we've identified, not just in the New York office, but actually in other offices around North America and actually globally, who are working with us. They are the evangelists who are getting us to other parts of the organization. We've also done like open calls for these mentors and are really just relying on internal visibility to get this out there. And so we're really lucky in that we basically have an incredibly supportive executive team who love what we're doing. So our SAP's chief marketing officer sits in this office. So this is a very small SAP office. So out of our 91,000 people, we have 250 people in this office. Our CMO is here. Our chief strategy officer is here. And when it comes to basically our head of North America knows exactly what it is that we're doing. In 2 weeks' time, the CEO of SAP is going to come and visit all of the companies. All we need to do is tell that to our 60 mentors. They tell other people. And now we have so many people within SAP reaching out to us saying, we want to be a part of this because this is so exciting. And that just gets everybody incredibly excited. And this is how change really happens. But thanks for the question.
I came up with an alliteration on the spot: proximity, people, and purpose. And so proximity, you just need a place for people, like people need to get together, right? If you didn't have this space, the CMO wouldn't have anywhere to go and they'd never meet the startups that are here. And so what we've built is a place for that to happen. So we've partnered with Alley and we've built co-working places where Verizon people, 5G nodes, R&D functions, and startups and the accelerators that we run are all in the same place. Like, it's just a fundamental thing, and it's not rocket scientist. It's just water cooler, happy hour, good things happen. And through that, the people come out of it. So you got to figure out, okay, how do I know that one founder who invested in this one thing back in the day and now is relevant for this other thing I don't know about? You got to do that first thing before you get to the second thing. And when you have people talking, good things shake out of it. And of course, you can go up the chain to the CMO who's part of an angel group that goes and introduces you to somebody else who's doing the same thing. So there's no magic bullet to create a network. You just got to go out and talk to people. And if you're not, or if you're shy, don't be, because you're just going to get left behind the person that does. And purpose, for us, it's like 5G is kind of hot now. It's this buzzy thing, marketing wars to come. We all know it. But we put a 5G stamp on what we're doing. I've been working at Verizon a long time. The only time I met the CEO of Verizon was 2 months ago when he came to the Alley to do a CNBC interview about 5G and what we're doing. And so when there's a purpose behind it that's important to the company, that's how you'll get attention to it. And then all three of those things start to come together in order for that catalyst to happen.
Unfortunately, I said we'd have 2 questions. We had 1 question. We're tight on time. We will all be milling about throughout the rest of the afternoon, so for any questions, comments, complaints, we're open to hear all the above. I want to thank our panelists, Vanessa, Greg, Bharat, Christian. You guys were incredible. And I want to welcome this is incredible, our very last full-on panel of the day, moderated by none other than John Lynn, the founder of Accelerator Awesome. It is engineering new ideas, why any organization should be an accelerator. Thanks for having us, guys.
All right, this is the last panel. How are you guys doing? Yes? I could not hear you. Yeah? Good? All right. I want to invite Patrick, Lisa, and Zach up to the stage. And gentle reminder that if you are going to network, that we need you to do it in the cafeteria. Cool. Huh? Negative. No. Take a seat. Yep. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Okay. So we're at the end of the day here. This is the last panel. For all of y'all that are sort of in the back, can you actually, Nora, looking at you, can you be an example and move up so that we can have this conversation? And anybody who's sort of in the middle, Chizoba, can you move up so we bring this conversation forward? Tony, can you move closer to us so that we can keep this tight? Mamoon, looking at you too, up this way, would be great. Cool. So, yeah, great. So as we've seen the sort of story unfold today, we've gone from an examination of where accelerators are at as a space. We have looked at how there are different opinions and projections on where it's going and what it's capable of. And now we've begun to explore the way that accelerators are relating with different sorts of organizations, different sorts of resources and technologies, to the extent that we're seeing new kinds of relationships form between corporations and startups. And so we're really driving towards a central question here, which is, where is innovation coming from? Is it coming from the accelerator? Is it coming from the startup? Is it coming from the resources of the corporation? Or is it coming from some new amalgam between all three of these entities? And so if you look at the byline of the conference here, right, we're talking about the Global Conference on Accelerators and the Future of Innovation in Organizations, not companies, not governments, not startups, right? This is a new kind of organization that's emerging, and the chemistry that occurs between these different teams is actually where the most exciting things are happening now, which is why these three panelists are the absolute best people to give us insight into how that's happening at some of the world's top organizations and thought leaders. So I'm very happy to introduce Lisa, Patrick, and Zach, all of whom are doing some pretty amazing things. Lisa is the executive director at Hearst Labs, which is an incubator accelerator function inside of Hearst that actually works in a pretty unique way when you think about the different ways that we've heard about accelerators and incubators functioning in institutions. Patrick is the author of the 10% Entrepreneur, which is published by Penguin Random House in 2016. Yeah, and it's been translated into at least 12 languages. And Zach is the founder of Future Labs, which is envisioning new processes, programs, and platforms that can help enable ventures and optimize for impact in the new economy. And so what I want to do is first start with Lisa and have her run us through sort of the way that Hearst Labs is organized and interacts with the different parts of Hearst.
Absolutely. So Hearst Lab is a greenhouse for early stage women-led companies. And what that means is that we financially invest in the companies and then bring them into Hearst Tower with us for about 9 months. And during that time, they get access to lots of different people within the Hearst network and Hearst resources. So we call those our scouts. So people with full-time jobs that donate some time to our companies and are really experts in areas that these startups desperately need help. So for example, marketing or PR. And then what we've realized is that there's also a number of needs that are pretty high ask for someone to give their side of desk time. So we actually have a full-time staff of fellows in areas like design, DevOps engineering, data, business development. And so they actually work across the different companies in the program and almost plug in as part-time employees. And then we also get great access to the legal team, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But again, that's really hands-on help with privacy policy, defining a contract, helping. We've done actually an acquisition from one of our startups. So that's the brief overview there.
Yeah. So what we're hearing there is that Hearst almost, and if you can actually expand on this, has defined different sort of entities around each function such that they can be called on as almost their own company, right? Is that correct? Like the legal unit actually comes in and serves that function with the teams?
So my colleague Chris and I are running the day-to-day of the program, and we almost act as 311 or sort of triage. And so companies will come to us with a specific need, and at that point we'll figure out, is this something for one of our fellows, or is this something within the Hearst network? We know somebody who's great at this. So an example, this week, one of the companies is looking to send out customer surveys. And at first that sounds really easy, but once you start digging into it, okay, should I do 5 questions or 30 questions? Should I send this to all of my customers? What technology should I use? There's a number of questions. As you can imagine, so Hearst is a media company. There's a whole consumer insights team that does this every single day. So we were really quickly able to match them with a couple of people on that team, and in less than an hour, they had all of their questions answered and actually had a draft of what the questions were that they were going to send out.
Perfect. And that was my next question, was for a story, so you've put me in a terrible position, Lisa.
I've got another one for you that actually is great, a great tie-in from the last panel.
Go for it.
So I think something else that we're able to do that makes a really big difference with the companies is we can introduce these startups to clients within Hearst. And as somebody mentioned on the last panel, once you have Hearst on your deck and you go to your next sales meeting, that makes a big difference. So not only is Hearst invested in us, but they're also a client. And you can imagine also that, for example, the benefits leader of Hearst is able to introduce you to other benefits leaders at different corporations. So I think that's definitely something that's very consistent across our companies.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And then for Patrick, the 10% entrepreneur is super interesting to me, and we've spent a lot of time talking about this stuff, both in terms of your perspective on how entrepreneurship can function inside of a personal lifestyle, but also in terms of a corporate or other business setting. And so if you can sort of clarify for the audience, sort of what a sort of elevator pitch insight into what the 10% entrepreneur is, and maybe an example of how you've seen it work well.
Sure. So the 10% entrepreneur is a reflection of a couple of secular trends that I noticed in our economy and our workplace. The first is that traditional careers do not provide the stable path they once did. I started my career on Wall Street, and then I was working at a division of AIG in 2008. And when my stock fell 97%, I realized that basically I was working in $1 trillion company that could offer me very little stability. Second is the fact that entrepreneurship, as much as entrepreneurship has become very attractive, and in fact many people want to be entrepreneurs, and a lot of us live with entrepreneurship FOMO. Despite all of that, the vast majority of startups fail. And so if you don't know that and you jump into the world of entrepreneurship, you are in for a rude awakening. And so I saw that dichotomy and I thought, how can I combine the best of both worlds? And I started working on entrepreneurial ventures outside of my day job. I have done more than 25, from investing in companies like Ipsy and Affinity, which have gone on to become big hits, to investing in companies that have not gone anywhere, to investing in an upcoming production of The Last King of Scotland in the UK. So a real range of things. And my friends asked me, how do I do this? I decided to write it down, and then luckily got introduced to the right people, and the book came out a couple of years ago. And since that time, what I've learned is I really wrote this for the individual because it came out of my personal experience of finding myself on the wrong side of the job market. But what I've learned since that time in speaking at companies and talking to people and talking to corporate innovators is that companies make a couple of bad assumptions when they try to create innovative environments in their businesses. The first bad assumption is that people know how to innovate, that they've had entrepreneurial experiences that they can draw from. That's usually not true. The second is that people's time and energy are 110% focused on their employers, when in fact, we all go home at the end of the day and have lives to return to. And so what I ask companies to do is to recognize the fact that their employers have their own entrepreneurial aspirations, and that those aspirations, if turned into real experiences, can give them the raw material they need to create more entrepreneurial companies. And so that's what I talk about a lot. And it's been everything from Google, which has the 20% concept, but has now embraced the idea of actually empowering its employees to work on social ventures or personal ventures on the side in their personal time, and they don't have to hide it or feel afraid, to a company that I work a lot with called Torre, which is an awesome tech company out of San Francisco and Colombia, the country, which has used the 10% mindset to create social ventures to help people in the slums of Bogota, to help, and this teams people up around something they can believe in. It's kind of the next generation of a mission-driven concept. And what this does at the end of the day, the benefit for the company isn't just being more innovative, it's retention is hugely important. And it also, that mindset helps in recruiting. Because I had a great conversation with a VR company here in New York, and the CEO says, if the people that I'm hiring don't have side projects, I have major concerns, because it shows that they're not creative, they're not makers, and they know how to think on their own. So that's kind of how it all plugs back into the corporate world.
Perfect. And there's one follow-on question I want to ask there, but before I do, I want to remind the audience that you're nearing the end of your comfort zone here. After we get through Zach's explanation, this is going to be on you, and we want your input and participation in the conversation. So the questions are going to be coming from this way after we get through Zach. And before I do, Patrick, thank you for the sort of rundown on the 10% entrepreneur and how it can function sort of alongside maybe a new sort of company format to also internally adjust behavior, not just access and resources. But I also heard the FOMO term there, and can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with that acronym?
Yeah, so me and FOMO go back a long way. I'm actually the person who created the term FOMO. I was a student at Harvard Business School. I come from Maine. There is no FOMO in Maine because, I mean, I love Maine, but there's not a lot to do in Maine, right? It's like, no, this, we go for a walk. And so when I went to HBS, I noticed this lifestyle. It was chaos. People were like, it's like, one person was flying in Milan for the weekend. Another person was going skiing in Park City. Another person was having a yoga instructor come in and teach, tantric yoga to 30 people. And I just was sort of like overwhelmed. I really wanted to do everything the school offers. And so I started trying to do everything all the time. If you threw a rock on the campus of HBS, you'd hit me because I was everywhere. And my friends started making fun of me and saying I had a fear of missing out. And I shortened that to FOMO. And then I came up with another term called fear of a better option, called FOBO, and I wrote an article in 2004 in the school newspaper called McGinnis's Two Foes, Social Theory at HBS, talking about FOMO and FOBO. And then I had a mini moment of flash celebrity on campus. People loved it. Never thought about it again until a reporter called me 10 years later and said, I'm writing an article about the origins of FOMO. I traced it back to you. And when my book was in market and I was getting rejected by everybody, and I got 33 rejections, that article came out right in the middle, and I had a book deal 2 weeks later. So
Just a fun story.
So the takeaway is create content because you never ever know what will happen to it. Just put things out in the world, and if if they have a little quality, maybe they'll come back to you in a good way.
Great. And Zach, if you can tell us a little bit about how Future Labs, perceives the opportunities in building a structured ecosystem around, not just designing new ideas, but also advancing them through different layers and platforms of growth, would be a great place to start.
I'd love that. First of all, I need to remember your pitch for my company because it was better than mine. Second, I didn't invent FOMO. I just have a lot of it. So I love being able to sit on this couch. Future Labs is a company in the social value space, and we're one of the first social value accelerators and studios. Not the only one, but it's one of the opportunities is being able to take this mindset and apply it to social value or world improvement solutions. The way we like to look at it is a lot of the time a given idea, being an entrepreneur is insanely hard, and being a social entrepreneur is exceptionally hard because you have to take all the things that are really difficult about entrepreneurship and layer onto that being able to solve a real problem worth solving in a sustainable, value-added way, right? So we invented this ludicrous term called the stochastic rate of ambitious entrepreneurial success, which is absurd, but basically defines all of the ways in which a major entrepreneurial endeavor can go wrong. We sort of break down those inflection points and say, is there a way to add value above and beyond the consensus of how to do this at any one of those nodes? And then we look at people who have done all of the rest of it and say like, okay, you've got this and this. We've attacked a problem from this angle so you don't have to worry about it. Do you want to jump in? Some of the stuff we build internally, some of the stuff we source externally, but we basically try to make it as likely as possible that a given social venture can succeed 10 years out. The last thing I'll say about that is that we like to center on organizations within the social value ecosystem that are almost intrinsically worth doing. Ideas that make you say, oh, okay, why doesn't that exist already? Why not? And a lot of the time those can generate way more interest than some sort of, hyper wonky solution where you're really spending a lot of time convincing people that it's worthwhile. So we like to focus in that area.
That's excellent. That just gives me the sense of why hasn't this existed yet, right? So do you have, an experiment story or anything that you can share on how you've tested that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this relates to one of the questions that I know has been asked a lot, or might be up on the screen behind me, which is why do an accelerator? We like to kind of work backwards from what is known in the social value space about what does and does not work. And a lot of the time you read papers in academia, you see trends, you analyze market data, and you basically say, okay, well, one of the following 7 trends is true, but we don't know which one. So what has to happen for a typical social entrepreneur is that they're sort of rolling the dice on one of those 7 options, or they say, okay, my lived experience was such that, I think that this is true and I'm passionate about it, so I'll jump in. That's awesome, and there's definitely nothing wrong with that. But that definitely sometimes can create a problem of scalability once you reach the ceiling of where that problem starts to apply. So we kind of worked backwards, and there were a bunch of trends, for example, in the very, very, very fashionable future of work space. And we connected that with some of the work that we had done at Andela, seeing, okay, how do we create opportunities that exist in the world's foremost tech companies to talent that exist all over the world, right? Why does where you're born define the opportunities that are available to you? And we said, okay, well, we don't totally understand which of these trends matters most, so why not start a fund that can operate using a thesis in that entire space, right? So in creating the flexibility for that to seed other organizations that allow it to sort of portfolioize its bets, but in the context of a central thesis of social impact that we know based on the available evidence is likely to succeed. So that's an example of kind of how we can structure things in a bit more distinctive a way and liberate ourselves from some of the challenges that occur to many social impact institutions.
That's so interesting because that's not necessarily from the side of format, that's from the transaction, the resource side, right? It's a new kind of fund.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, to be a little bit heavy-handed here, right, we have an example of how a large institution has sort of reformatted itself using a labs function in order to interact internally in a way that can more organically produce innovation. We've heard about an approach to behavior and mindset that doesn't require a C-level strategic reorganizational shift to begin producing new outcomes. And we've heard an example of how we can actually envision an organization as not just the thing we're in, right? How does our unit interact with multiple different stakeholders inside of an ecosystem, and can we call that an organization? So, the way that I like to think about this before, this is your last chance, I swear, and then the questions are coming from you, is when you think about what this means for how organization collaboration is evolving, I think about Google. And I think about 20% time, but I also think about Google not being Google anymore, right? What is it? Alphabet, yes, I wanted it from one of the audience. Alphabet, right? It's Alphabet because now it's a platform. It has the ability to organically create new brands, new products, new approaches and solutions. And to me, that's kind of an accelerator from what we're hearing today. At least, hopefully, the case has been made that that's a reasonable assertion. With that in mind, let's hear from you all. What do you think? What questions do we have here? Mehmet.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mehmet. Thank you. My name is Mehmet Umut. I'm the founder of Smart Professions. I'm glad you mentioned Google. It's actually a great serendipity because I was just thinking about it. Because I was going to ask about education and how to accelerate learning. And you mentioned Google, because Google is the tool I suggest my students use first. Now it's a school almost. If you're a guy from Turkey, you just Google data science, and now you know that, oh, okay, this exists, and there's this General Assembly thing, or maybe I can go there. I don't want to put my ideas in your mouth, but I just want to hear your thoughts about how can we accelerate learning? Please. Thank you very much.
Great question.
Well, I swear I didn't seat him in the audience, but before we started Future Labs, we started the Future Project, which was a company in the education space. This is a bit of a cheaty answer, but it's related to the phenomenon you defined, which is there's more information than ever that exists in the world, right? Getting access to it, while a meaningful challenge, is nowhere near as hard as it used to be. I think much of the challenge is a couple of things. On the individual level, there's the question of engagement and motivation. And the question of passion and purpose and inspiration, of caring to undergo that process in the first place, right? And I think that a lot of focus in education and learning is on the tech side or on the access side, and not nearly enough on the side of getting people to be taken over in a wave of passion for why doing that is worthwhile in the first place, as many of us who have entrepreneured things have experienced. I think the second is on the side of systemic inequity, right? It's obvious that access to opportunity is not evenly distributed. And I think a lot of the time product solutions come at things from an individual angle without acknowledging the ecosystem and the environment inside of which they operate. And I think that all of us who are attempting to incentivize and encourage learning have to take a look at what we can do on a systemic level to make opportunity to not only access but deploy learning in a meaningful way available to everybody on earth, no matter where you are and what you look like.
I completely agree. I think what your comments really drew upon the idea of the democratization of access to info. And I've been lucky enough to talk about my book in Myanmar and Uganda and Brazil and many of Cote d'Ivoire and all these other places, and all of these people that I meet are people who get their information from YouTube. They're learning core skills, and they're globally competitive, right? Which is awesome, and I think we can all feel good about that. And at the same time, there is also this interesting phenomenon, which you have people who are more senior in their careers in the United States, for example, who still need to be learning, because everybody has to be in a continuous learning process. And so when I think about 10% entrepreneurship, I'll give you an example. I spoke at a book group of people in Silicon Valley, and they were inspired to create a fund because everybody has full-time jobs. But on the side, they invited me along, so I joined them. And about 40 of us from all different companies, different backgrounds, have gotten together, pitched in some money, and now we're investing in startups that are coming from our networks, but also allow us to tap into the knowledge of everybody else and learn alongside. And so one thing that's really important as we think about, all of us, is that we can all find ways to engage with early stage businesses that would value our experiences, but where we're probably learning as much or even more from them than they're learning from us. And so it's a real two-way street, and that's something that doesn't take a lot of time. It's not, this is not 3 days a month. This is, a couple hours here and there. But once you get plugged into that and you realize that it's something that you can do, it's pretty powerful transformation.
I think that's a great point, and what's important there is to figure out how to make that high ROI for both sides. So for your example about data science, so you can go and learn everything there is to know about data science and then answer one question that you're thinking about. Or if you can find a pairing of two people, one who this is their expertise and someone else who, maybe wants one question answered about their business, if you can make that pairing highly relevant and as frictionless as possible, the expert gets to give really relevant, high quality advice, and then the founder or entrepreneur gets what they need out of it as well. And it might be, hey, you do need to learn everything there is to know about data science, but I think that sort of mentor matching, and probably anybody here who is running an accelerator or is an entrepreneur or a mentor totally identifies with this. It's not great when you spend 2 hours with somebody and you know that you didn't really bring them value, or you're a founder and you spent 2 hours and you could have been answering 80 emails that were in your inbox. So I think that matching is so key, to your point.
It is. And, despite my request for questions, that was such an important one, meant that I let everybody answer, but also means we're already behind and have time for one more. So, who else? Yes? Would you pass the microphone? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Vicky from Artesian Venture Partners in Australia. So my question is sort of touching on two things that both Pat and Zach spoke about. So it's about this notion of purpose. So as a VC and just being in the startup scene for so long, I see all of these entrepreneurs coming through and having FOMO, where they just want to create a company, and there's no purpose behind it. And what I find is they start a company and they'll leave a company, start a company, and it's like the fifth company is the real thing. How do we get them to the calling straight away, rather than this giant loop, to 10 companies before we find what their calling is? How do we speed that up? And have you guys found any models that work for the individual?
I started last time, so one of y'all jump in.
All right, it's a great question, and my apologies to the Socceroos and being kicked out of the World Cup, but but it was a good showing anyway. It's a really good question, and I think you're right. And the reality is that I firmly encourage people to start something before quitting their day job. Why is that? Number one, it's because there are statistics that show that people who start a company before quitting their day job are about 33% less likely to fail, because they give themselves the runway to actually try out an idea and see if it works before they have to actually go out and raise money or live off of it. But number two, it allows them to see if they even like doing the work. Because what happens is, it's all fun and games when you're like sitting with a napkin, you're at the cool co-working space and everybody's got their skinny jeans on and they're drinking like the hard green juice. It's all good, but I've tried to start things, and it's when you're in month 2 and you've gotten 15 no's and you're starting to spend money, and it's like, you want to be doing something else instead of working on this on Friday night. It's when you hit those kinds of barriers and the real sacrifices. The reality is entrepreneurs work harder than everybody else to make less money. The average startup takes 7 years to go from Series A to an exit. So you've got to live for years in this very difficult environment. And so if you can get a taste of that without having to throw away everything else in your life, I think that is a great way for people to then get really serious about what they're going to do. And I have found that people always say to me, I wish I had found your book 2 years ago before I jumped in full time, because I would have had a much easier time in the early stages of my business because it's been such a struggle. So that would be my advice, but I would love to hear from the other panelists.
So my first thought when you were asking that question is that I wonder if it's more the trait of a person. So we definitely meet founders that are very much have the characteristic that you just mentioned, and we decide not to invest because their authenticity of what they're doing is tough to believe in. And I guess I'm not following their path to see if they do find something that really resonates with them. But yeah, that's my gut, is that it's almost more of an innate quality.
I'll say a couple of things about that. The first is that I definitely think you don't want to put yourself in a position where it's the market's job to solve for your need for personal catharsis. And if there's a founder who, is trying to prove something about themselves by virtue of being a founder, I think that I get the impulse of that, and I don't want to invalidate that, feeling. But that's not a reason to attempt to invent the opportunity for product market fit in a startup, right? I'm reminded, I used to be a literary writer before this, meaning that even my most successful things sold probably 1/1000th of what you did. But the most indulgent, just awful to endure created works are those that are created by someone that needs to fulfill upon an identity of I am a writer, right? As opposed to I have a story worth telling. And I am the person to tell it, right? And so I think that's really analogous to founders, and is worth doing some real coaching to have that conversation. The final thing I'll say is just that there's actually a lot of research on purpose and a lot of research on purpose in the context of institutions and of learning. Bill Damon is especially great at this. And I think that one of the things that is just great for all entrepreneurs is to actually take a second and dive into, not the design research, not the prototyping research, but the actual academic research of a subject area that people probably know a lot about. And to see okay, what can I glean from this that may not be intuitive, but that really smart people have thought about. So.
Awesome, great. So I think one of the interesting things that came out, especially in this last question, but throughout this conversation, is that really in order to have a more organic system of innovation or economic creation at all, there needs to be a clear sense of identity, whether that is in your own interests and abilities in relationship to an opportunity or to what that company is or what that product should be, right? And if we go back to the beginning of the day and think about our conversation around what counts as an accelerator, we even hit friction around whether it matters what counts as an accelerator, right? And so there's this sort of ongoing ambiguity around who is an actor in the system, what should they aim to do, and how should people support them? And I think that's something that these three perspectives have had great insights on. So thank you all. Yeah. And with that, we are entering the final session of the day before our finale, because what would an accelerator summit be without demos? So, here we go. It is the OTEC pitch competition with Larry East.